Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast, second ever live event. My name is Jason van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the regular podcast that features new episodes with industry experts weekly. My co-host Joel won't be joining us on the audio today, but she'll be busy behind the scenes answering questions via the live chat on the Flourish TX YouTube page. She'll also be selecting some juicy audience questions for the panelists to answer in the last part of the show. Now, what I want to do is to introduce my co-hosts, or panelists, I should say, for this episode. First of all, we're going to introduce Peter Kelly from the UK HSE. Let's bring him on. How are you doing, Pete?
Yeah, g'day. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks. We up from last night.
Tell him I'm an Australian. I've got my longboard in the back. Look.
Yeah, I don't need to tell you that, Peter. That you're everyone that you're Australian. I think you're going to tell us about 5 times over the next hour or so.
Probably 5 times in the next minute.
And great longboard. So, what took? How long have you been longboarding for?
I started longboarding when I was 14 and 54, and then I started again 6 months ago in the lockdown because it was one of those impulsive buys on Amazon. I wiped out once, but the rest of the time I'm pretty much on it. Like it's just like learning to sort of snowboard. Really, just sort of get back on the board and you do your thing, and everyone just laughs at you because you're 54 and you're skating down past your house. And but all about well-being, Jason. It's all about well-being.
Well, I applaud you, mate. I'm 40 in a few months myself, and there's no way I'm getting on a longboard. I've had too many operations already. I don't want any more. So, well done.
No worries. I got the scars as well.
All right. Well, let's introduce the lovely Marianne Baynton, the godmother of Psych Health and Safety, all the way from Canada. Thanks for getting up early for us, Marianne.
Hey, it was tough, Jason, but glad to be here.
Yeah. Are you caffeinated up?
Yeah, I'm almost there. Almost there. Getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mentioned on LinkedIn that Peter definitely has the best time zone out of all of us. I think it's midday. It's 7 p.m. for me and 7 a.m. for you. So you took the bullet for us. Thank you.
I've done 10,000 steps already and had a coffee. So I'm really, really pumped and ready to go.
Terrific. Well, for the listeners, just to let you know how it's going to work. So Marianne, Peter and myself, we're going to have more of a fireside chat this time. For those of you who tuned into our last live event about a month ago, we had Wade Needham do an amazing job at moderating. So good, in fact, that no one wanted to follow his act. So we thought, well, let's not have a moderator this time. Let's just the 3 of us try and have a chat. I'll try and keep Peter in check and try and stick to some form of a rough agenda. So we'll probably have a chat for about 60 minutes, and then we will have 30 minutes for question and answers from the YouTube chat. So if you're on live on YouTube, feel free to drop in a question in the live chat, and Joelle will be feeding us some of the best questions to answer live. So given that the 45,003 standard came out just within the last few weeks, we thought this is going to be a great chance to talk about this standard. And Peter's holding up the BSI version of the standard, and we're going to talk about that standard today. But given that both Peter and Marianne have been so instrumental in the development of their country's standards that well preceded 45,003, we thought who else could be better in the world to chat about the new standard with. So really thrilled, and I really hope that all the listeners today get a great information out of today. But what we might do, the first thing we want to do on the agenda is to discuss, why psych health and safety, and why do we need an international standard on this? And probably the best thing to think about to start with is some of the statistics that we've got in our various countries regarding the state of work-related stress, anxiety, depression, and psychological injuries. So starting with Australia, I guess what we can talk about is that, last reporting period for workers' compensation statistics from Safe Work Australia was the worst year on record. We had over 10,000 workers' compensation claims, which for a small population like Australia is actually quite a lot. It accounted for about 9% of all of our workers' compensation claims. But it's up about 50% from about 5 years ago. Now, Safe Work New South Wales, the state regulator over there, also had some really interesting statistics over the last 5 years. So from 2015 to 2019, they tracked a 3.5% increase in physical injury claims. Now, 3.5% increase is pretty stable over 5 years, you'd think, for physical injuries. But when they looked at mental health claims, the increase was 53%, so similar to what we were seeing nationally through Safe Work Australia. So that's a massive increase, right? Which means that we've got a large and growing problem. And in fact, when they looked at the average cost of these claims, they found that the average cost for a physical injury claim was about 21,000 Australian versus 85,000 for a mental health injury. So what we're seeing in Australia, at least, is a regular increasing amount of psychological injuries versus physical injuries, and the cost is going up as well. So yeah, some really interesting things here, and that's one of the reasons. Obviously, we've got things like codes of practices coming out in Australia regarding psychological health and safety. While we've got amendments coming to our regulations and WHS Model Act regarding psychological injury as well. But I might throw over to Peter. So what do the stats look like over in the UK, Peter?
They're not good. Sorry for my little dip out there. I hadn't plugged my computer in. So we were 10 minutes from touchdown. So that's why I've now plugged in. You've got me for the next hour and a half, if not longer. If you look at the UK and particularly also in the EU, the numbers are just continue to go up and up. I mean, for example, in October, we released the stats for last year, which were up to March, and we had 17.8 million days lost to work-related stress, depression, and anxiety, 828,000 people off. That was an increase of 3 million from the previous year and 200,000 extra people. And that was 1 week into the pandemic. So 57% of all sickness absence in work is now related to depression, anxiety. And we're broadly seeing the same figures across the European Union. So if someone thought there wasn't a problem, then they're clearly blind, because the data is very clear in most countries, and most of the regulators, obviously I work with other regulators, are acknowledging this is the seminal occupational health problem of a generation. And we've stuck our head in the sand and done nothing really about it until now, when we've got a fairly major problem. And we've talked about this before, Jason, haven't we? If this was asbestosis, we would be absolutely ridiculed.
Yeah, really interesting, right? Like, I mean, the pandemic obviously has shone a light on mental health in the workplace with all the changes that have occurred, and the instant working from home that we all faced around the world. But as you're saying, all of these issues were there pre-pandemic, and obviously what we're seeing now is that this is probably just making the issues worse. But Marianne, what about in Canada?
So I want to kind of flip some of this because before the pandemic, we did a national survey, and we found that those organizations who were implementing the psychological health and safety standard not only had less than half the amount of employees saying that it was psychologically unsafe in their workplace, but they also had much more significant attendance from those who were actually living and managing mental health issues like depression. That, in other words, that a safe workplace is one that supports productivity and performance. And of course, we're looking at the statistics here, and anxiety is up, depression is up, but that is a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation, which is this life-altering pandemic. And we feel that as we can help people to adjust to a psychologically safe workplace, that we will be able to bring those numbers back down to what is normal or even better.
Yeah. Really interesting, right? I mean, we're seeing the same things around all the countries, and no doubt in the rest of Western society as well. But then tell us, Pete, then what is the common approach to how we address workplace mental health?
So, well, if you, from a regulation perspective, it's looking at risk assessments, and it's looking at the measures that you put in there to manage those hazards. But actually, what most people are doing is investing in the individual and not the organization. So we're teaching people to be mindful, we're teaching them to be resilient, we're putting mental health first aiders in, and we're not actually looking at the source of stress, which could be the workplace. I once did a presentation, and just about to get up, and there was an illustration that somebody wanted strong, resilient fish in their pond. And I went, okay. And Kerry Cooper was next to me. He was the keynote and he sort of shoved me in the ribs and said, "I can't say anything." So I stood up and I went, in my opinion, I've killed loads of goldfish in my backyard pond, and it wasn't the fish that weren't resilient. I was told when the pond man came that the filter was gone and the filter was dirty. So it doesn't really, we do these individual issues. You're still putting people into a toxic organization. They're going to eventually be made ill. So we have to move the focus from individual purely to individual plus organizational and secondary interventions, which we'll talk about later. Yeah. So the common approach is to change the individual. It looks a lot like the 90s, doesn't it, Mary? Teaching people to cope. Remember the crystals we used to give to people? Make you feel better, make you feel a little bit like empowered, but actually doesn't do anything really to change the place. So.
Yeah, and we've definitely discussed that at length on the podcast, how the focus typically is on the individual, on symptoms, rather than the systems that, can make them unwell. But would you say that's similar in Canada with the popular approaches, Marianne?
Yeah, absolutely. And what was the very most common approach in Canada years ago, before the standard was introduced here, is to send someone to the employee assistance program. And I'm a great supporter of employee assistance programs. I think they really offer a lot to people that may not have access to support. But it just avoids dealing with the source of the issue if you're just sending them away to someone and thinking they're going to fix them and then send them back to you. And I just want to say, because I think it's so important, that for organizations and for leaders who have never actually used their own employee assistance program, that when you're sending people, because it's for people like you, it's for those people, it has a certain stigma around it. It has a certain air of, that it's not a good thing, that it's sort of a last resort. And my advice is that every leader should be calling up the EAP, trying them out, being able to say they answered the phone after this many rings, this was what the intake was like, this is my experience of it, so that you make it something that people are more likely to take advantage of. But again, as Peter says, that's not enough. We have to think about those that are going away for treatment and coming back to the same toxic workplace. And what can we do about changing the workplace, or the goldfish pond, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I've used that one myself. It's fantastic. But
I hope you copyrighted it, Jason.
You know me, I patent everything, Pete. Unfortunately, that is what we're seeing, right? But that's why we obviously have needed more guidelines from ISO regarding what is best practice to how do we do workplace mental health? How do we keep people healthy? Actually, one of the questions that has come in from YouTube already is, can you give me an example of what a psychological injury would be? And obviously, Peter, you would say something hopefully along the lines of any time when someone actually has to take time off work due to work-related stress, anxiety, depression. Then we also talk about workers' compensation injuries, in which, then it has to be proven that at least 51% of the injury was due to work-related factors to be compensable.
No, that's dead true. I mean, obviously, in Australia, you do have a compensation. It's a national compensation scheme, isn't it, for psychological injury? We don't have that here. People have to go to court through the civil court to seek compensation and gain. But yeah, psychological injury are those things that have contributed where you've gone off work, and the contributing factors are work related. So you might be in work and you're under excessive amounts of pressure. And that pressure becomes overwhelming, and you are you then report to your work, I can't do it anymore. So in Jew versus Intel, which was a really interesting case, Jew said, the workload is way too much. I'm doing too much here. And Intel at the time ignored that, and Jew was successful in the compensation gain. So it's that sort of where you can show the relationship between the two events. So in the court over here, psychiatric injury has to be shown to be connected, but not by the same level of criminal sort of support. So it's possible that this event and that event led to that outcome. So,
Yeah, okay. Well, hopefully that clears it up for the audience member who asked that question. But we're going to talk about 45003 today. But the reason I really, really wanted the two of you on this panel today to talk about the new international standard was because you were so instrumental in the development of your own country standards. And interestingly, because we've had you both on our podcast, episode 3 for you, Peter, episode 10 for you, Marianne, apparently both standards originated from pubs.
True story.
Technically, mine was a bar.
A bar, okay, yeah.
In a very nice hotel.
It was 3 bottles of wine, not the not the one.
No, the 3 bottles of wine was a significant contributing factor to the standard. Yes.
Yeah. So
not
Peter,
all on my own. There was 3 of us, so it's technically a bottle each.
That is interesting because it was 3 of us, and we were in a hotel bar. So yeah, but we did drink beer, Peter. We weren't drinking wine.
My boss is a little bit posh at the time, so it was, we went for a couple of bottles of. This is the problem. He had French reds. You know, I'm Australian. I like myself Australian reds, as Jason knows. But I know I went. It was. I think we had 3 Merlots, so it was a nice wine. But yes, not that I'm saying I'd recommend drinking Merlot if you're going to develop a national standard. It
has to be a Shiraz, doesn't it, Pete?
Yeah.
Now, Peter,
Marianne, I hope it wasn't Bud Light because I'm disappointed. You know?
No, it was not. It was worse. It was worse.
You do decent IPAs in Canada.
Yeah. Well, Peter, let's go back to 2004. Obviously, the management standards were published back then in the UK. What made the HSC decide it was a good idea to publish standards on psychological health and safety?
Well, in 2009, we had a change of government, and they were freaking out that we'd had 8 million days lost to work-related stress. And literally got a call. We were out at a conference, got a call to say, we want you to develop a national approach to tackling work-related stress. And that was at about 6 o'clock. And we sat in this hotel bar. And over the course of 3 hours, we went from a small-scale project to a full-on national program of work. So as I've told you, Jason, we didn't have any paper, so we wrote it on the back of some beer mats. Then we transferred it over to the computer the next day. But we did it because actually we were seeing this rise in sickness absence. In 1995, we had 6 million days. Then we were up at nearly 9 million in 99. And by the time we launched the standards, it was 12 million. So there is a progressive movement there. The first standard on demands was 34 pages long. Thought it was brilliant. It was a scholarly piece of genius, except all the businesses that we sent it to, because a cohort of businesses had a group in London, just unilaterally turned around as one and went, "You're barking mad if you think we can do 34 pages." So the management standards, as we know, were developed through masses of engagement with employers, trade unions, and bodies, and we actually put them down to 1 page as direct feedback from the businesses. Because as scientists, we want to produce the best, but we had to produce something that was relevant to the organisation. So we did it because we could see there was an emerging theme, there was an emerging area, and when we did launch in 2004, we were at 12.5 million. And then by 2006, we were down to 9 million. So once you start getting involved at an organizational level on these areas, you do, as Marianne will confirm, you get to see marked results. You've seen that with your own standard, haven't you? People applying the standards. When you take your eye off the ball and then you know other things come in as they do, then that tends to rise. And 17.8 is the worst on record. It's the worst on record. Sorry, my computer wants to do a restart, doesn't it? It's the worst on record since we collected stats. So I guess if ever there was a time for the management standards, and people say, are they relevant now? And I say, yes, they are. Demands control, role relationship, support and change are all part of organizations. And if you begin doing the organizational bit, you'll make a difference. So I think that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
No, that's all right. I mean, I think it's really important to understand. I mean, ISO 45003 was developed with a lot of insight from particularly the UK and Canada in the development of their own management standards, right? So it's useful, I think, for the listeners to understand how and why these things were developed, because
you've got to bring the businesses with you. You've got to bring the trade unions with you, and you've got to bring other governments with you. You can't do it in isolation. So you have to be a diplomat, a trade unionist, and a business advocate all in one to get this process out. And we gave out 100,000 CDs. Remember what CDs were? We gave out 100,000 CDs at the tube stations in London on the day that we launched, which was so that's the kind of big sort of picture. A senior civil servant said, "I don't want a scout hut. I want the Royal Albert Hall." And it was, so that was our delivery mode, putting out CDs and pressing that. So, but you really got to carry it on. And we've done a lot since then. Yeah. So if you go to our website, there's a mountain of stuff that you can get for free.
Yeah, terrific. And Marianne, you were involved heavily, obviously, with the development of the Canadian standard. So tell us again, why was it decided when the three of you, I guess, founders of the standard, that it was time to do something about workplace mental health and take more of a psych health and safety approach?
Yeah, I think we started a little differently because we started with the free stuff in Guarding Minds at Work. And once we had a way for employers to do this without a huge cost, then we decided that a consensus-based, arm's length, credible national standard would encourage more people to do it. Whereas Guarding Minds was created with funding from Canada Life, a corporation, we felt that something that was government-led, that was a consensus-based process and standalone would help. And then we also had a matrix which mirrors what Peter said. We had trade unions present. We had people from different interest groups, but it was a balanced matrix, so no one interest group could win, if you will. And so it was very much coming together, working together. When we went to the public for review of the standard, at that time, it was unprecedented that they had 866 people respond with comments about it. And many of these were actually groups of people. And there was a fair amount of resistance from certain groups because they were afraid this was going to tie the hands of organizations so that they couldn't even operate, that they certainly couldn't be sustainable. And some of that information was taken back. We really looked at it. Can the standard exist in organizations without it being onerous or a real burden? And adjustments were made to make sure that that was true, so that it wasn't hoops to jump through, but rather a support. And what we found afterwards is that even these groups that were very resistive to the idea became supporters of it once they really understood that, no, we're not trying to make it impossible to run an organization. But I think the biggest difference was when we were creating the standard, we were thinking about what we were going to call it, because a lot of people were using the phrase workplace mental health. But that phrase brought up the same issue that we always had, that we're talking about those people, that we're not talking about the organization. And we chose psychological health and safety, which was not a common phrase back then, specifically to align with organizational or occupational health and safety, to say the organization has a responsibility to protect the employees that are there from psychological harm, in the same way that they have a responsibility to protect from physical harm. And so very deliberate use of language to say that there was a responsibility. And what was really paradigm smashing at the time was that there was a responsibility for leaders to be competent to support in a psychologically safe way. And there was a measurement of the organization for the impact that they were having on employees. And up until then, even the Occupational Health and Safety Act was more about the environment than it was about management. And so it really sort of shifted to say, we leaders and organizations have a role to play and have a responsibility.
And that's why we call them the management standards, because it put the onus on the individual and the management to work together. Because traditionally people have just worked at the individual level. You change and we'll keep the process exactly the same way it is. And yeah, so management is the key. And I don't know about you, Mary, but over the last few years, authentic and passionate leadership has been at the forefront of some of the biggest moves we've seen in health and well-being. And Canada Life took, I like complete respect, as an insurer. They came in and they could see it was beneficial to do this, and that's what we'd been trying to do in the background for when we were launching the management standards, was to get the actual insurers on board. They did actually turn up once, 4 of them in grey suits, very traditional English. And I walked up to him and I said, "I've seen you at a couple of meetings." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, we're from the insurance industry." I said, "Well, I'd guessed that." But they said, "You know what? We keep paying out claims. And what you're presenting here is a possibility of helping us to moderate that risk by actually make it that we can align our health and well-being, insurance policies with the fact that you should be, managing these risks." So brilliant that, Canada Life had the foresight to jump in there and do that. I know we had some early conversations. This is about 12 years ago with some people from Canada at the time about the standards. So wonderful to see. As usual, you guys have maxed it and took it to the next level, which is where I would have wanted to go. But we weren't able to do the same level that you've done with yours. Marvelous.
Yeah, just to say, though, we studied the health safety risk. No, what's your standard called? We studied the UK.
The stress management standards or management.
Yeah. Dr. Martin Shane in particular was very familiar with it. And we spoke to some of the people that were involved to say, what would you do differently now?
That was me. There were the 3 of us in a meeting in an office. Yeah. And he came over, the 2 of them came, because there was another gentleman from Canada who came over. That's it. And we sat in an office and we had that exact conversation. So it was I was super jealous when he was explaining what he was going to do, because I was like, yeah, we can do that. But we have edged away at this because we're in a different sort of cultural environment over here. But we will win. We'll get it.
Yeah. One of the things that we said, because there were 30 some people on our technical committee, and we said that nobody got exactly what they were hoping to get, but everybody got something that could be used by 100% of the organizations in Canada. So that consensus building was really interesting. And it was like a microcosm, because we worked really, really hard. And yet we were respectful of differences of opinions. Everybody was able to speak up and to have what Martin Shane calls safe voice. And so we were experiencing a high-functioning, hard-working, psychologically safe team while we were creating the standard. It was an interesting experience.
Yeah, same here. We're a team of 4 now, but when we developed the standard, we were 24. So. Right. Yeah.
Again, kudos to Canada Life for putting that money behind the Canadian standard and Guarding Minds at Work. Amazing, and definitely in some of the conversations we've been having recently with insurers, both here in Australia and overseas, there is that obviously fear of that rapid trajectory we're seeing of psychological injuries and the cost associated with these as well. And insurers obviously are highly incentivized to work with their clients to help reduce claims. And they're now saying that the wellbeing approach clearly isn't working, and they need to take more of that risk management approach. Let's get down to the source of these issues versus dealing with the symptoms after the fact. So insurers, I think, are going to be doing a lot in the future.
Yeah, that's what some of the people really high up said is, sure, it might reduce claims, but our issue is that the people never really got better if the workplace was toxic. And so, you know, it's heartbreaking, even for insurance people, to see someone continue to suffer. And so, yeah, it was certainly more the money that was incentivizing some of the people in the organization to get behind this.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. Yeah, the moral obligations of these groups as well. And I guess the sustainability thing that a lot of people are interested in, you know, how we're building ESG and particularly that social element.
There's a question in here which we'll answer the question section, which I'm itching to answer.
Oh, you can answer it now if you like.
Well, no, it's Peter Kelly just made a mention, health and well-being. Is well-being an additional to health, i.e. health is part of the standard, but well-being is a separate thing? When well-being was first pushed forward over the last 10 years, we've seen this term health and well-being. It started out with the absence of mental ill health, that if people didn't have mental health, but they were healthy psychologically, then their well-being would be improved. What well-being is now is a cacophony of different interventions, is it not? Financial, environmental, physical, psychological. And actually the well-being, the term well-being now it's expanded from its original thing. I believe it is that if we create the right work environment, we promote health. We don't incubate ill health, which is what we are doing most of the time. So if we promote health, then we see an association in people reporting that their well-being, their psychological well-being has improved, but their financial well-being might not have improved because they still might be on a rubbish wage. But do you see what I mean? So that's kind of like, the well-being as we know it is being redefined, and I think that's really important, you know. But we have to hold on to creating healthy workplaces. I'm sorry, but I don't believe in the 21st century we should have places that actively make people ill. Did you actually sign up to a contract that says I'll make you ill? Because if you did, then you're mad, because you shouldn't have signed the contract. Do you know what I mean?
Irony, yeah, Peter, the irony of it all is all of the literature is showing us that psychologically safe workplaces on average are more profitable. So it's not about being nice. It's not about, you know, being a bleeding heart leader. It's about, if you want to get the most out of your employees, if you want to maximize their energy, maximize their productivity, this is the way that you do it. But what we know is that that some leaders think, well, I have to be nice all the time, or I can never demand anything. And that's not what it is. It is about making it safe to speak up and helping people to do their best while they're at work, which promotes well-being. Right?
And that's really important. I've seen leaders who are running multinational companies who have got up and said, I just can't handle it at the moment. I need some time out.
Yeah.
And you know, because they've said that, because they've been real, because they've been genuine about it, the organization said, we'll get behind you. The Danish Prime Minister goes off with depression, and the entire cabinet goes to his summer house to be with, to get, you know, to run the government from there at government meetings. You know, did the Danish country disappear because their prime minister had depression and anxiety? No. And it is that being real and lived, you know, and we're all, remember this, we are all leaders in all of our groups. We can lead from the front by being genuine and open and compassionate. I'm going to go off on one there, so I'm going to pull it back, Jason, because I know there's a list of questions here, and we've got 25 minutes, and we're about a third of the way through.
Yeah, that's right. Well, really what we wanted to get to today, obviously, was more talking about the new international standard, which Peter obviously had a bit to do with, and I think Marianne had some questions for you about that.
So, Peter, with this international standard, tell me how you feel that it differs from the UK standard, the Canadian standard, and what you think it has to offer organizations.
No, I mean, I think it's a logical evolution of the work that we've all been doing as independent countries, in that actually it brings together the different approaches. So the management standards, your standards, the Australian standards have been developed, the ones in total worker health in America, and some of the standards that are coming out of Asia as well. And it brings them together in one place and says, okay, what would an international standard look like? So it incorporates elements of all of the standards, but in a structured way. So it's similar in its approach to 45,001, which was a safety management system for health and safety. So this is really a health management system for health and safety, for psychological health and safety. It was a long 3 years of meetings and conversations and lots of debates, which are always good fun, yeah. So I think it puts it nicely into an overarching perspective, and I'm happy after 3 years to say actually the content that's in this standard does reflect some of the best practices that you will see, and it does give you a systemic approach to it. And it does address some of the inadequacies of all of our standards, which didn't necessarily have the high level of support we've got here from multiple countries. 74 countries involved in developing that.
So 74 countries couldn't possibly have agreed on the level of intervention to management styles, management rights. So tell us a little bit about how countries that are used to more autocratic organizational command and control style were able to come to a compromise.
Through a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. Really, we have if you look at the standard and you follow the standard, it's a very systemic approach, and it's very, it's aligned with 45,001's hierarchy of control, and that's generally accepted across almost all regulatory authorities, is a hierarchy of control model. But what it does is it brings in the other elements, which is psychological health and safety, which we talk about are these primary, secondary, and tertiary elements of the organization, the promotion of health and the treatment of people, which is the tertiary element. And if you look in the management standard, so if you look in the standards, you will see under hierarchy control, it will describe actually most of the initiatives that are here are what we call primary, secondary, tertiary, which we'll cover, or Jason will cover later, because he does it a lot better than me, because I just waffle. But yeah, it was a long time coming, and there was several times in the meeting where you've really got to stick with your point. But you compromise and you engage, and then you come out with something that you universally accept. We were up in some cases at 3 multiple time zones. We were up at like 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning, so other people didn't have to be up. So we were shifting the time frames around. And when we were meeting, we'd be meetings for 10 hours a day, and have an hour break and a couple of coffee breaks. But it would be small groups and then into a bigger group to negotiate and then back out. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but to me, it's amazing that you were able, and your group was able to come to that consensus, that you were able to get the buy-in. And when I look at this new standard, I'm very proud of the work that all of you did, and that we can start to change organizations around the world rather than just in our countries. Somebody asked me, well, why is Canada doing this when your organizations are pretty safe anyways? And my answer is because somebody has to do it. Somebody's got to lead, and look at where your group took that. It's an amazing thing. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up is that on the Canadian standard, we have the annex is bigger than the standard. And in it are all sorts of helpful resources and approaches to really implementing the standard and being able to do it. And I think, Jason, some of the stuff that you're working on is really going to help people with this standard to be able to implement. And that's what they need, is that kind of support.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a little bit, Marianne.
My computer is insisting on restart, and if it does restart, I'm going to come in on my personal computer on the link. Okay, so I don't know how to stop this thing. It keeps saying I want to restart in 5 minutes. It's just screaming at me. So if it does happen, I'll come in about a minute later.
Okay, not a problem. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it, Peter. But yeah, no, let's hear more about the standard and its development. Hey.
Oh, yeah. So Peter, when you have released the standard now, what are you hoping for? What are you hoping will happen with it, and how do you expect organizations to leverage it?
But we're hoping that organisations will apply it to their own standards. So in Canada, you would attach it to your Canadian standards. In the UK, we would attach it to the management standards, and actually it gives you a formal structure and a system to do it. So we're hoping that it will go into the existing regulatory framework or the existing programs of work that are there. So that's the hope. For those organisations that have not done it, then what we're going to, they don't have these approaches. I think it starts that conversation, gets people going, so there is a simplified version of it as well, because obviously it's 34 pages long that you can have a look at. Jason's been providing some excellent training for an hour on which takes you through on what you can expect to find and what you need to do. So yeah, I think it's the promotion stuff is there. So yeah.
If you were to describe it as in the Reader's Digest version, how would you describe to somebody who has no idea about these standards what it is and what's in it?
What I would say, it's effectively a roadmap for what you need to do to find yourself looking at psychological health and safety. The thing is, right, when we started out in this pandemic, people didn't really talk about psychological, did they? We didn't really cover psychological health. It was one of those woolly things. We've done it because we've been doing it for years. But what we find is now you can talk about the word psychological, you can talk about stress, you can talk about mental health. So I think really to describe it to people, it's a map. It's almost a roadmap of taking you through that process. And actually, at the heart of it is conversations. At the heart of it's engagement. It's about listening to your people, finding out what the issues are, and working with them through that.
Yeah, it's the plan, do, check, act model. Absolutely. Which we're all familiar with, and I think the difference is we're using that model to think about how we interact with people, because really, isn't that what psychological health and safety is? Just how we interact with people on a daily basis. And one of the things that we talk about is that it's not enough for the leaders to be psychologically safe. It has to come down to how the employees treat each other as well. And I love how the standard that you created breaks it down even more than what the Canadian standard did into all of the little elements that do impact psychological health and safety, both internally and externally.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the aim at the end, because throughout the process, I said, who is this for? Is it for the standards people, or is this for businesses? Because if this is for businesses, it's got to be in a language that businesses understand. It can't be in our terminology and our understanding of what that means. And I think that's been absolutely key is getting. You can ask anyone on the standards committee. I always was on it. Language is super important in this area. Get the language right. Then that'll be really important. So. It's funny, isn't it? The ability to listen and think and talk is a human emotion. And we go to work and we go, oh, geez, I can't do that. Like, why? Why can't you do it? Why can't you go in and ask somebody at work, how are you traveling? How's your day going? And it's that kind of those sort of general conversations. But then that's just the one level, isn't it? The other is make sure the work is designed so it improves, it actually sustains people and keeps them healthy, or just at least don't make them ill. It should be, we put a guarding on a machine because it's an obvious risk, don't we? You put your hand in there, you're going to get your fingers chopped off. And for me, with the mental health, if you create workplaces that are toxic, something's going to happen. The fingers that may not drop off, but they will go ill. Or in some cases, we know toxic work environments have higher rates of accidents. Why? Because people are not really engaged. They're under pressure. They're making mistakes.
And it's been my experience, and I'm curious if it's been yours too, that most employers want to do this. They just get stuck on how. And so the whole idea behind these standards is, as you say, give them a roadmap, give them the how, so that we make it easy for them to do it, rather than say, well, you should just know. You should just know how to be psychologically safe.
Wait, I mean, do we? The point, you teach your kid to ride a bike, right? What do? Do you push them down the, well, Jason might do this. Do you push them down the hill? Or do you actually go
grass hill, maybe, Pete?
Yeah, grass hill, mate, yeah. Or do you stand by them?
Yeah, exactly.
I just think sometimes it's that kind of, you stand by them, you sit, you work with your people, and you work together, and you consult, and you come together and you find compromise. Here's a revelation. When you do an intervention and your people decide what that intervention is, it's normally not going to cost you much money.
Well, and
I think a lot of money, but
yeah, I think here in Canada that some employers looked at the standard and it just seemed overwhelming. It's only 15 pages, but it seemed overwhelming to them that there's so many check boxes and so many thou shall, and yet what we say to them is, this is just a framework. It's a guideline to help you, and that what you really have to do is understand what psychological safety is and what it isn't, and be able to start that journey anywhere that you can. And one of the ways to start is, what can you do around psychological health and safety that's in support of your organizational goals and objectives anyways, rather than thinking you have to start at clause 1 and go all the way through. And when I looked at this newest standard, I feel again that just skimming through it and picking up different parts that really align with what you're doing anyways or fit in would be a great start, without having to commit to the entire thing right now when you're working at getting people back from what's going on.
Starting the conversation.
Right.
Just start the conversation. I don't know if we should start the conversation. And like, really? Generational impact on mental health? If you just start the conversation now, you've got 10 years of rubbish ahead of you. Maybe that's being a little bit sort of critical, but it's got to start now.
Yeah. Peter, somebody asked me, how can you see burnout or mental health issues when it's virtual? And I said, you can't see them. You have to hear them by having discussions about coping strategies and about the challenges at work and about what kind of help that you need. If those conversations happen regularly, then you can hear if somebody is struggling. You don't necessarily have to see, but if that's not part of your conversation, then it's going to be awkward and it's going to be a one-off when somebody's struggling. Embed it in every team discussion. How are you going? How are you dealing with this stress? How are you coping with everything that's going on? So we can revolutionize it without a lot of money, without a lot of even effort.
Yeah,
I found a workaround. Every 5 minutes I have to click this button, so I found a workaround.
Yeah, keep it alive, Pete. But both of you mentioned that importance of consultation, right? Like risk assessment can be as simple as, how are you going, and what are the things that are causing you grief or stress that I can help you with as a leader, and that other piece that you said, Peter, like that might be something that's very simple to do is, what would you suggest if you're in my shoes? How would you make work better?
I mean, that brings me to my question, though, which is, I mean, how would you do psychosocial risk assessment? How's it typically done? Because that's the interesting question, is it not, Jason?
Yeah. So, look, the way it's typically done, I think, can be quite burdensome to organizations. Often there's a long survey involved if we're talking about a large organization. Often we hear the objection around survey fatigue, and I think there's ways around it. And in fact, I might be talking about another live panel soon where we talk about this in more detail. But I'm actually more interested, Peter, because we've done something that we're making available for free. Really interesting to see that ISO recently made it at least free to view the standard, not download it. They weren't that generous that you could download the standard, but you could read it online. But I really think, like Marianne said, there's this translation piece. You've got the standard, but some people look at it and their eyes either glaze over or they get scared. Only 15 pages. Even if it's only 15 pages, right, Marianne? People will go, well, that's too difficult. And so you need an annex to go, well, this is how you practically adopt it. And we thought, well, let's get with 2021 and let's create an e-learning course on the standard. And I got to say that Joelle was the one who actually took the bullet for our team, and for about a month took 45,001, the parent standard, and 45,003 side by side, and really worked out how do we actually describe to people what is this new standard, how does it fit under the existing safety management system standard, and what would someone need to do practically to actually adopt the standard. And so that training that we've made available is, I'll just put it up here on the screen now. It is available at 45003.org. So that is something that is, again, freely available, and people can go on it and do it. We've had, since we launched it on the day the standard was published, so only 3 weeks ago, and we've already had 1,600 people actually enroll in that course. So there's a lot of interest in this topic of psych health and safety. And obviously, the standard is standing on the shoulders of giants in the management standard and the Canadian national standard on psych health and safety at work. And so what we've done is basically provided an annex like you've got for the national standard there, Marianne, but put it in a format that I guess people are now used to seeing, and makes it really digestible. And Joelle's done a heck of a job in really talking about how it aligns to the parent standard 45,001. So
I like to think of it as Beauty and the Beast, Jason. But yeah, and also
Joelle or 45,003 and 45,001.
No, I think 45,001, 45,003. That wouldn't be very good, would it? It's a wonderful hour of taking people and simplifying it. Although I do think that T-shirt that you're wearing in the video is very tight. It's time for me to go on a diet again, I think, Pete. Thanks for pointing that out. That's fine. But I think it's a good. I know I put it up on my LinkedIn, as you know, and shared it with people, and they've really sort of appreciated it. But it is making it simple, making it clear for what people understand, so I think we're coming towards the half an hour of questions. I love this because that's completely out of your control then. So I can answer any questions, can't I?
Yeah, no, Joelle will be choosing questions that we get to answer shortly. Yeah, but what I might do is throw over to Marianne just briefly before we take questions from the audience. And I just wanted to ask you a few questions, because obviously the national standard of Canada probably is the standard that most closely resembles the 45,003 standard. So given your experience and seeing how companies in Canada have adopted your national standard, what would your advice be for companies wanting to adopt the new international 45,003 standard?
Really, to start where you're at, to think about what you would like to be different, and then scan the standard, take the training, figure out what would be best in support of your organization. I mean, certainly what Dr. Jody Samra calls the full meal deal, doing all of it is great for organizations who have those resources, that bandwidth to be able to do it. But don't delay starting to address psychological health and safety because you don't have the ability to do it all. Just find something. And one of the things that I say is just ask the question, how will this change, this policy, this process, this interaction affect psychological health and safety of the employees that are here? And if you ask that question and really start to learn what the answer is to it, you can make big changes. And then the other thing that I've said before, and I say all the time, is look at what your organizational goals are and consider what approaches to psychological health and safety would support those goals. So if your only goal is to increase sales, then we know that emotional intelligence has a direct correlation to an increase in sales. So help boost the emotional intelligence of your sales staff. You will improve psychological health and safety, and you're supporting your goal. And we could do that with almost any goal that an organization has. We can help them to see how approaches to psychological health and safety can be in service of that. So there's lots of ways to start. But start.
Yeah. So I guess you have seen obviously a lot of companies try to adopt the standard, and maybe that's in part, maybe that's the full meal deal. But what are some of the common reasons they fail?
So often that they want the entire project, and what happens is you have a senior leader who's really behind it, and then that leader leaves. And the person that comes in goes, no, I have other priorities. There's other things that I want. And if we embed psychological health and safety in our existing policies, in our existing processes, in our existing leadership training, in our existing employee training, then you can't throw it out as easily when there's a different priority. It becomes part of how we do business rather than a separate initiative. So that barrier is the largest. I don't see money funding as a barrier because most of this can be part of business as usual. But I do see when someone's taking it on as a huge separate project that resources can be a problem because most organizations don't have the ability to devote a full-time person to this, to manage it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I've been saying to organizations, particularly the larger ones, right? If you've got a health and safety team that comprises 10 professionals, knowing the typical incident rate of psychological injuries, then at least 1 in 10 of those people should be devoted to this kind of area and have some subject matter expertise. Interestingly, I was chatting with someone the other day. They're in a company of 20,000 people. They've got a team of internal people on psych health and safety now. So I've got a leader and then 3 people in her team. So amazing how companies are resourcing this now.
Yeah, in our standard, we suggest that the team be from every single level. So frontline employees, middle management, upper management, the union, the Joint Health and Safety Committee, because it doesn't matter how great the leaders are. They could stand on their head doing everything exactly by the book, by the standard. But if employees are not treating each other in a psychologically safe way, you're not going to have a psychologically safe organization. So to me, this is the good news, is that it's not all on management, that it is something that every person has to have a responsibility for. So that if you do it in that way, that everyone has a responsibility, then it's much less pressure on management and it's much more effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's using those levers that are there, so if you've got a large organization, make mental health a KPI on which people report. If you've got, do you know what I mean? We were originally, when the Thriving at Work report came out, which was Stevenson and Farmer, which is their review, the recommendation from Dennis Stevenson, who's in the House of Lords, that KPIs should be set for mental health and for the promotion of mental health. Now, if you do that, then that gets the larger organizations. But from the smaller perspective, it's actually making the workplace the kind of place that you want to go and go home from and still feel okay. And I think, it's important to have that. And there are different ways, if you've got trade unions, use your trade unions, get behind your trade unions and get them to realize, actually, this isn't a tool of government or a tool of management. This is an effective way of getting the work environment right. I'm a trade union myself, and I do have very candid and open conversation with trade union reps across in the UK. Don't see this as something that adding a burden. See it as a key to opening the doors to get better workplaces for people.
Yeah.
That KPI, key performance indicator, is so important because, of course, whatever we measure, people are going to do. But the other piece for leaders is to understand that psychological health and safety is not asking you to be a mental health expert. In fact, we say it's not even ethical if you happen to be a mental health expert for you to be diagnosing, treating, or counseling your own employees. So being held responsible for psychological safety means that your employees feel safe to speak up about concerns, to speak up about things that are going on in the workplace. And being measured on that means that you will continue to operate in a way that makes it safe for people to speak up. And it's not what a lot of leaders think it is, that I have to be that caring, compassionate person all the time, and I have to know when somebody's depressed. No, you just have to have a safe environment where someone who's struggling could speak up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's good to talk, isn't it? Remember British Telecom ran a campaign with Bob Hoskins, it's good to talk. And I remember saying that when I had a conversation with BT, it's good to talk. And it is all about that. Start having the conversation, destigmatize mental health, put mental health like any other risk in the workplace, address it, talk about it, engage with your employers, standard health and safety. And we've got some wonderful questions in here, Jason, that are going to take us into some really fascinating areas.
Just before we move on to the question, just want to summarize a couple of things that you guys have been talking about, and I think they're really important points. So psychological health and safety, first of all, is not something that management do to employees. We really need that broad representation of the company, and you really need employees to buy into that process. So you need to involve them at all steps. If you think about risk management, obviously consultation is a key element of the whole process. And so involve employees and their representatives throughout the process. And the second thing that Marianne, you said is, to guard against this losing steam in case you have key personnel turnover, you really need to incorporate it into your business practices. How do we operate? And so within our own Flourish DX guide around psych health and safety, we talk about, incorporate it into your health and safety policy. Don't create a separate psychological health and safety policy or mental health policy. Go, well, as an organization, we're going to commit to asking people periodically, how are they doing and what are the psych hazards that might be, making them stressed at work so that we can intervene. We are going to commit to providing people education. If we're not going to eliminate the sources of work-related stress, then we're going to at least teach them how to keep themselves healthy, and how to respond and report psych hazards as well. So, make those commitments in your health and safety policy so that that's the way that we do things, right? Rather than a key person leaving and we've lost all the steam behind this initiative.
So Jason, I just want to add, one of the fears that many leaders have is if I ask someone how they're doing, they might tell me. And then what? If they say I'm dealing with bipolar disorder, well, I don't know what to say to that. And my advice is you're not trying to say anything to that. You're trying to ask questions. What do you need? What do you need in order to be able to come to work, do a good job, and leave at the end of the day with energy left over with this condition? And to the extent that I can help you be successful at work, I will help you. And for everything else, whether it's your personal, your health, your treatment, your relationships, your finances, then I'll link you to resources, because I'm not the best person to do that part. I can help you to do your job if you're able to be at work, and I'll link you to the rest. It's that simple. It's not about you being able to solve their problems.
Yeah, and I really want to get the questions, Peter, because I know you're chomping at the bit. But again, Marianne, you point out something really important. I mean, people can become mentally unwell due to a range of reasons. It might be genetic predisposition. It might be some individual circumstances. It might be a macro event like a global pandemic or economic uncertainty. But the only thing the employer can control is the work-related factors. You know, how is work designed? How is it managed? So their responsibility is that bit. And if we do that bit well, if people are stressed due to other reasons, then hopefully at least we can alleviate some of the cumulative stress on the person, because we know it's that cumulative effect of multiple stresses from all areas of life that ends up being the thing that usually is the thing that makes people ill. Marianne, I think we have lost Peter. His computer finally did restart, but we'll hopefully get him back on in his personal computer in just a moment. But what I want to do is maybe turn over to some of the questions from the audience that Joelle is been doing and or has been getting from all of the comments. And it looks like we've had about 100 or so comments so far, which is amazing. But the first question I want to ask you is regarding stigma. And so maybe I'll leave some of the ISO specific ones until Peter gets back. But this one here is a good one for you. So what is the number one thing employers can do to reduce the stigma of employees opening up about a mental health problem?
Open up yourself about your own mental health. My saying is we all have mental health issues. Some of us have a diagnosis and some of us don't. But we all go through times where we have repetitive thoughts, where we're not sleeping well, where we can't focus well. And as leaders, Brene Brown has this term, confidently vulnerable. If we can start ourselves talking about, you know, today's a rough day for me, I lost somebody, or I just am not feeling like I'm focused and this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm dealing with this. If we can start it and make it part of the discussion, we can reduce stigma, because it's part of the human condition, mental health, and mental ill health is part of the human condition. Yeah,
no, I couldn't say it better myself. Another thing is about the use of language, and we've got Peter back. Well done, Peter. He's on his personal computer.
I think it's 1-0 to the government. Couldn't stop it from shutting them down. So there you go.
Yeah. This question's an interesting one around, I guess, and language, I think, does help either perpetuate or can help to extinguish stigma. In the standard, the terms mental health and psychological health are used interchangeably. Do you see a distinction, and how do we begin to control the language around this standard?
Who are you asking, Jason?
I might ask Peter, seeing as he's just come back.
Great.
Do I think there's a difference? I think the term mental health and psychological health are one and the same. I think we use the word psychological health in this standard, but what we're looking for is people's mental health, is creating mentally healthy workplaces. So if your mental health's impaired and your psychological health impaired, the outcome is exactly the same. So they are interchangeable. It's a language issue, but I think we should be moving to psychological health. That's how you'd expect that of me, because I'm a psychologist, I guess. But yeah, so I would be more inclined. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, we specifically, because we talked a lot about, do we use mental health and psychological safety, which I think are two different things, right? Psychological safety is the responsibility of the organization to do no harm, whereas mental health is often associated with mental illness. And when we say psychological health, we wanted people to say, what are you talking about? Because psychological health is the well-being of every human being, not just those that may have a diagnosis. So we wanted it to bring people away from mental health is about mental illness to we're talking about everyone. I liken it to, if we have chemicals in the air that are hazardous to our health, those with asthma are probably more vulnerable. If we have psychological risk in a workplace. Those with mental illness are more vulnerable, but all of us can be negatively impacted. So we wanted the language to be more inclusive.
Yeah, and I'm always going back to the simplicity of the language, which is important. And I think at the moment, we have a little bit of effort to get people to understand the term psychological health. But, I think there'll be that interchange between the two. Certainly, mental health is not the absence of mental illness. If you look at the World Health Organization, there are quite a useful description of what we describe as mental health, and it's way more bigger than the continuum of mental illness. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a language issue, isn't it? To be honest, as long as we get people talking about mental health and talking about what we can do to create a work environment where people grow and sustain, I think that's important. Am I clear, Jason? Because obviously my very useful broadcasting mic is not connected to this.
Yeah, no, it sounds perfect, Pete. No, thanks for that. No,
And do I look wonderful? This high definition webcam.
Always look beautiful, Pete. So interestingly, Marianne, I've noticed that you've used psychological safety and psychological health and safety interchangeably here as well, and they are quite different terms as well. So there is, they mean quite different things. So psychological health and safety, when we talk about that, obviously we're talking more about risk management applied to understanding and controlling psychological hazards, and then psychological safety is that feeling that you can speak up without threat. Basically, or have voice within an organization. We often joke here at People Diagnostics there's way too much psychological safety because Joelle just rags on me too much. So they're very different terms, and I think we need to get I think language is really important to get right. But similar to yourself, Marianne, and the decision made by Canada, I think it was very wise not to use the term mental health in the standard because of the connotations that people have. So even though the World Health Organization, as you point out, Pete, actually put it in a very positive way, what is mental health? And they talk about well-being, don't talk about illness at all. People still have that connotation. So psychological health at least is a bit different. And definitely here in Australia, the Institute of Health and Safety has put out a paper last year on this, and they have said that the preferred terminology is psychological health and psychological injury if someone wants to get injured at work due to work-related stress. So yeah, I think language will go a long way to helping to address some of the stigma and make it more inclusive, I guess, for people and understanding exactly what it is that we're talking about.
As long as we've got a clear definition of what we mean by the term, the language, and that, and I think that's stigma arises because of ignorance. And yet, if you go through the last 15 months, every day someone is talking about mental health in the papers, on the news. It's out there. They're talking about people's mental ill health, but they're also, interestingly enough, because we did a critical piece. Well, not we. I did a critical piece of the press, and I said, if you constantly concentrate on the negative, people's mental health will be impacted. Whereas actually, there are a lot of other people who are having a different mental health experience during the pandemic. They've learned new things. They're learning skills. They've learned to appreciate things that they didn't appreciate before. I mean, I actually bought a book on birds. I mean, I'm not a twitcher, but having spent all of this time in the garden and feeding the birds, I wanted to know who I was feeding and stuff like that. So there are elements where this pandemic has maybe brought out some of those positives in terms of, but yes, but there are, most of the time, people have had a difficult experience when you talk to people.
Yeah. One thing I will just point listeners to very quickly, if they're interested in understanding more about language and appropriate language, is the AIHS position paper. We will put a link to the show notes in the podcast, at least, to that paper, which really talks about this as a language you should be using to talk about these sort of things. So a very quick question that I'll just deal with very quickly is, are there checklists available which can be used to audit organizations based on the new ISO? Not checklists to audit necessarily, but Joelle Mitchell, again, our in-house expert on ISO 45003 and 45001, has created something which we call the Flourish Factor. There is a video on this on the 45003.org website. And it is basically distills the standard down to 23 elements, basically, that you can work through in order to adopt the whole meal deal, if you like, Marianne, in relation to the ISO standard. So again, it's a very useful tool, and you can find out more about that at 45003.org. Question, I think this one will go to Pete. Why develop a separate standard instead of revising 45001 to incorporate psychological health and safety?
What a great question, eh? I mean, effectively, what you could have done in 45001 is put a paragraph to say that the above standard also relates to psychological health and safety, and that perhaps would have, mitigated the need to spend 3 years in a committee. But the issue really is we are talking about two elements of workplace practice. We're talking about a safety management and a health management system. We now, I think, need to focus, because of, as we've gone through the pandemic, back onto health issues. So having something like psychological health and safety and well-being, I think, is actually the right thing to do, because as we come out of the pandemic, you're going to need something more than simply 45001 to establish systems and processes in your organization in how to manage some of the fallout from people being constantly in offices, or constantly working from home, isolation and loneliness. So but I came into it after they made the decision to do 45003. I would say if you just simply added that paragraph, I think it would be weak, personally. I think you do need, having spent 20 years working around this area and working with a number of regulators across the globe, you needed something that was a solid, robust, scientific piece of work that was practical. And that's as close as you'll get to practical, but we've got to make it even more practical. Originally that was 120 pages. Just be thankful you got 34.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to psych health and safety that you wouldn't get the key messages or the key information out if you were just to amend 45001. So I think that's the main reason. One
of the things, Jason, which I've found that's been, I set up a coffee thing, didn't I, at 2:00. Beginning of the pandemic, someone told me it's only going to last 3 months. So I thought, that's all right. I'll do a daily Zoom meeting at 2:00. And you can come and have a coffee, and we can talk, and don't necessarily have to talk about mental health, but it give people a space where they can have a talk. And yet 15 months, nearly 18 months in, is it 18 months? Anyway, it's a long time, but I'm still running it. And actually, what has been brilliant is people have gone and done their own thing. There are people doing breakfast Zooms. They're doing 5:00 Zooms. They're finding ways to get people to communicate together. We've lost the option to go and have a cup of tea in the brew room or at the kitchen, and I think that's been an important component. Is we've dumped everyone in home and then not thought about, well, how do I actually do the engagement bit? That psychological healthy bit of having people around you and feeling supported. But yeah.
It's a great initiative of yours. I've jumped on that Zoom, even though it's not time zone friendly for me, Pete, a couple of times.
Just for the record, though, I have jumped on. I have phoned you at a time-friendly time view, which means it's about 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night. Because
good thing you're a night owl.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
got another question. Might throw this one over to Marianne. To what extent does the panel feel like this new standard is holistically complete? If limited, what additions would help to complement it?
Yeah, I don't think we could have it complete because every organization is different. And it's important that organizations can customize to suit their unique circumstances. I mean, if we're doing psychological health and safety in a ballet school, it's going to look very different than doing it in a police station. And so we really, and this was something that many of us that were involved with the standard came to understand, is that any one interest group would say, this is the way you have to do it. But the reality is you have to talk to your people, and you have to then try something based on what they've told you, and you have to measure to see whether or not it worked. And then it's a process of continual improvement. So to say that it needs to be complete is not understanding the necessity for it to be customizable.
Yeah. Just because something's a listed doesn't mean it's the full package.
Right.
It's a listed because it grows and it develops. And for the record, I used to do ballet, and that's as bad as any physical activity I've done in a workplace. So, but yeah, so it was a long time ago, 40 years ago. But there you go. So, but yeah, it holistically doesn't mean it's a complete package. You know, it is part of something that will grow and develop. And this is it. It's going to grow and develop because we've got a generation to get through. The kids who haven't been at school for a year and a half are going to be in the workplace in 3 years. The university students that haven't had contact and had those university years to form are going to be in the workplace in a few years. We have got to, we've got to do that stuff, haven't we? We've got to look at workplace and design them in a way that promotes people's health.
Yeah. And the thing is, if companies adopt this into their safety management system as it's designed, then obviously it's about, using this as part of a risk management and continuous improvement approach, as you mentioned as well, Marianne, the Plan, Do, Check, Act. You don't just do it once and then you become a mentally healthy organization. You just don't follow the standard and we've ticked all the boxes, we're done. We don't have anything left to do. It's now we have to go into that cycle of continuing to ask people, how are you doing? What could we be doing to improve? What's changed? I mean, we just saw in the pandemic, right? Like massive changes. We need to be aware that when changes occur, that there's new risks that are introduced, and we need to be mindful of managing those things as we go.
And if I'm an inspector, I want to know what you've done to manage that risk, and then I want to see I'll come back in 12 months to see you've implemented what you've said you've implemented, and that is the real. That's what we're looking for. You've got to commit to the changes. Don't put 25 changes in; you won't do them. Put five or six changes. Make 2 of those really quick wins. Make the other ones that you're working, because your organization has to have belief you're going to change. So that's why you have quick wins, because they go, oh, well, they did that. Well, they did that. Okay, well, I'll give them the benefit of doubt on this. But you don't. If you go with these massive programs of work and change and don't give people the ability to see quick wins, they go, I'm not going to support it.
Yeah, and that's that other thing as well, right, Pete, around, companies think that they always need to eliminate the hazards. Now, that's obviously what you want to do, like eliminate it at the root, the source of the issue. But sometimes elimination isn't practical, so redesign's better. It's the whole idea of as low as reasonably practicable. What is practical? Thinking about budget, and hopefully that's not your only concern. Hopefully, you're willing to spend money to make your workplace, more enjoyable to be in and more productive. But
well, it's just good business, isn't it?
Yeah.
Businesses that look after people flourish. They become effective. Why do we have the top 500 companies in the Times? The top 100 all have health and well-being. Wow, revelation! People looked after. People work better and work more effectively. It fascinates me, this transactional model of leadership where you go, "You're going to do as I tell you." And then when they don't, you get into conflict. Whereas if you're doing a transformational where you're actually bringing your people along because you're looking after their health, they go, yeah, I'm up for that. We've all had people that we work for who inspire us. We've also had people that uninspire us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
probably a question that flows on nicely from the previous one is, do you have tips on how to address the psychological health and safety of blue collar workers compared to white collar? Maybe over to you, Marianne.
So it is exactly the same, that you engage them in, what is it that you need to be able to come to work, do a good job, and leave with energy at the end of the day. And you listen to them and you give it to them in the language and the approach that's going to work. This isn't rocket science. This is a really simple thing, is that you're discussing the challenges, you're discussing the stressors, and you are looking for solutions with the employees. So the whole issue of diversity, of inclusion, of blue collar versus white collar, of different sectors, doesn't matter, because you're engaging and asking the very employees that you're trying to support.
I did this with a group of foundry men. One foundry had 3 Foundry women in. So, but the bulk of the industry is male. And I acted terminology and changed the language I use to explain mental health. And as you'll appreciate, Foundries are a very fruity environment for language. And actually, you've got to have reality with these people. I go in and talk in language that's convoluted. They don't get it. If I say, sometimes you're going to feel crap, what does that feeling of feeling crap feel like? They get that terminology. Right. And actually, it's about that. And once you get people, I've got lads who come in, I'm not doing this, don't like it, you know, and yet 10, 15 minutes, when one of them opens up, the rest of them open up and start talking about it. And then you run a mental health campaign and you run it around, you know, something that they can relate to. And I think that's really important. So blue collar workers, white collar workers, stress doesn't differentiate. You know, you've got a blue collar, I'll go to the white collar one first. Mm-hmm. It kind of it's there, you know, and we've seen that a lot, you know.
We've had teams sit on a tailgate to have these kinds of talks. We've had them sit on their toolboxes at construction sites. Yeah. It's very low tech. It doesn't require anything except a leader who's willing to be confidently vulnerable and be able to have that conversation with their employees. And they always say, well, they're not going to feel safe to talk to me. And then I say, okay, well, you start talking about you start talking about your experiences, and don't ask them in the beginning to continue to add to it. And over time, they're going to understand that it's safe. It's safe to make mistakes. It's safe to speak about challenges, and they will. As you said, I was warned once when I went to an all-male place up in Northern Ontario, and they said, you know, we just want to warn you, like they might tear a strip off you. They might even walk out. They're really rough and tumble kind of guys. And like you, Peter, my experience was we started to talk, and then they all got into it, and they were lined up to speak about their personal issues when
absolutely.
They're humans. They're not. They're not Neanderthals just because they're blue collar workers. Many of them are intelligent, compassionate human beings. Yes, they're not used to talking about this, but that doesn't mean they haven't thought about it.
No, and I went to one founder. It's a big lad there called Paul. He came and he said, "This is rubbish. I'm not doing it." And I said, "That's all right, Paul." But at the end of that session, right, he picked up, I wouldn't recommend it, but he picked up this mold, which was about 30 kilos, shoved it on his shoulder. He said, "Take a picture of this." As a picture of him. And he was smiling. He said, "I get what you're doing." And then we walked out for lunch. And as we walked out for lunch, I was with the supervisor. And one of the lads that had been on the course came up and said, "Boss, can I have a word with you a bit? I was just been in that, you know, opposite being in that meeting. I think John's got that. You know, John on our shift, I think he's having a bit of a problem." Now that was instant. You know, the fact that they felt that they could then have that conversation, I think that's huge. I have spent 20 years saying, simplify the language, get people to talk, get in there and do what you need to do. I've got to retire in 13 years. I think it's 67 over here. But, you know, come on, let's spend the next 13 years making mental health and psychological health normal. Because I think that should be the massive legacy. Do not make the legacy of the pandemic people's mental ill health. Make the legacy of this pandemic is we change workplaces and make them a place where people can live, grow, and flourish and develop.
Yeah, great messages, everyone. Peter, I'm just conscious of time. I've got to wrap up in 2 minutes. Just a very quick one for you. Is there a plan to accredit ISO 45003? So I think that means to make it certifiable.
No.
Easy.
Some individual countries may choose to accredit, but there's no global decision to accredit it. And I actually think you don't need accreditation to do something that's going to make your business better. You should be doing it, and this is a good way of doing. This gives you the outline of what you can do. You know, and if you're confused, then look at the resources, the stuff that you've done, and others have done. Because you know, I mean, Jolly's a legend, and yeah, we had her on a podcast over here, and it was really good fun to talk to someone who's equally as passionate, which you and her are around this area. Yeah. we are in the generational change, and we have to do it. Yeah, because I'm really tiring of all the excuses why we don't make psychological healthy workplaces.
What I'd like to add, though, Jason, here in Canada, we have organizations that give awards for organizational excellence, like Excellence Canada. And in most countries, those kinds of award-giving organizations exist. And doing the ISO 4503 or 003 will get you in there. So you can get accredited outside of the standards organization.
Yeah.
And this for me, Jason, behind, above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world. Let's be positive. And this is Roland Dahl, it's a painting by a local artist, but it's about that. It's actually, let's look at creating workplaces that keep people healthy and safe, psychologically and physically.
Well, I applaud both of you. You both have such perseverance and resilience yourselves to be seeing this through. Marianne, for you, for more than a decade. Peter, for more than 2 decades that you've been working in this space and banging the same drum. And I'm really hopeful that with this new international standard, if nothing else, then the language kind of gets through and, companies start to have more of a blueprint and start to adopt that standard. Whether there is the carrot or the stick approach, hopefully it doesn't matter. Hopefully everyone, as you say, keep saying, Peter, it's good business. Like good businesses do this. So, and look after them.
And pop onto my LinkedIn and say good day, and and come on and have a coffee sometime.
Yeah,
it's there. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm not committing after the pandemic, but geez, this thing's going on, isn't it? So.
Yeah, you're going to have 50 people turning up to your Zoom meetings on a.
Listen, 50 is just like being in a big bar, so we'll make it.
Yeah. So
also, listeners, though.
Peter, you make it really, really hard to finish up these things, mate.
I know.
But no, look, thank you to both of you so much for your putting your hand up to participate in this live event. Like I said, I could not think of 2 better people in the whole world to be on this event and chat about the standard and, and your collective wisdom and experience. So thank you so much. What I might just do very quickly, listeners, is let you know that this podcast, this webinar will be available on YouTube within the next couple of hours. So if you've only joined in for a little bit, you will be able to go back to the very beginning and watch the webinar from the beginning. We'll also be releasing it at our normal cadence tomorrow as a special edition of the Psych Health and Safety podcast as well. So you can listen to it on your drive or commute into work if you're not locked down like a lot of Australia is going into at the moment. Make sure that if you want to unpack or understand more about the 45,003 standard, that you do check out the free 45,003 Foundations course available at www.45003.org. Remembering as well that ISO generously have made the standard freely available to read now. So if you go onto the BSI or the ISO website, you will be able to access that for free. Unfortunately, you do have to pay if you want to download your own PDF version. Also be on the lookout through the 45003.org website where we have our training program. We will be releasing 2 new training programs within the coming weeks. One is how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment, and with psychosocial risk assessments being a key part of the 45,003 standard, as it is the stress management standard and the Canadian standard, then that's a really good go-to. And also there will be one around building a business case. So I'd imagine with the 250 or so people who logged in live, obviously you're interested, you want to make a difference within your own organizations, and we'll hopefully be providing you with plenty of ammunition to take to your top management and say this is why we need to do it and how we can achieve it. Finally, just a plug for our next live panel, which will be on the 4th of August. Like I said, psychosocial risk assessment, again, is a key part of the management standard. And we want to talk to some of the best people in the business about this. Adam Nebbs is a PhD candidate from University of Tasmania who is supervised by the amazing Angela Martin. And his PhD has been around looking at the current ways that we do psychosocial risk assessment. So Joelle will be joining me once again for that one, and we'll be having again a bit of a roundtable discussion around what does psychosocial risk assessment typically look like, and how could it be improved in the future. But that brings us to the end of this webinar. Again, thank you so much to my fellow panelists and for Joelle for fielding all the questions. and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Jason.